it's not power over someone, it's our internal power to overcome circumstances. The bulk of people tend to rely in this one area, and that's conditionally powerful. There's always a condition to that power, but the desirable mood is when we're unconditionally powerful. Happiness is an inside job, and even our state of our attitude is really about not outside, but it's internally. I could not do anything that I had cancer, but I could deal with how I was going to respond to the cancer. What I did is that was actually at the same time as the Great Recession in 2009. So what am I going to do about this? And I took that as an opportunity to retool my business. And from those years on, we've had our best years ever in business. But essentially what I did is I disrupted the negativity and redirected it and said a factual statement.
There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of your comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. Today we're talking about power. Now, it's easy, I know, to feel that you have no or perhaps not enough power. However, I also personally believe, and I see, people have a lot more power than you may realize. So what we're going to talk about today is how do you tap into your own sense of power, and to give you some strategies for helping you make all the difference that counts, that in both in your actions and in your team and in the performance of your group. So my guest today is Stephen Gaffney, and he's the CEO of Stephen Gaffney Company, a leading expert in creating consistently high-achieving teams. Don't we all need that one for sure? 30 years experience working with top leaders and executive teams from Fortune 500 companies, a bunch of associations, government agencies, and is an authority on issues from team achievement and thriving cultures to leading change, daily innovation. His website, if you want to know more, is Stephen, Steven, Gaffney, Gaffney.com. The book we're talking about today is Unconditional Power, a system to thrive in any situation, no matter how frustrating, complex, or unpredictable. Stephen, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you for having me on your show.
It's a pleasure. Really looking forward to this. All right. Why power? Of all the things that you see drive high achieving teams, why power?
Well, it's not power over someone, it's our internal power to overcome circumstances. And when you look at today's work world, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of changes. And so it's easy to focus on things that are beyond our control, but this is all about focusing what's within our control. And I've worked with some of the best CEOs, admirals, and generals, and whenever they're faced with a problem, the best ones look at themselves first, the worst ones look at others first. So this is all about our internal power.
Yeah, but that internal power, in my view, you can disagree with me if you want. That internal power, that sense of my own power, is what I use to project outwards. And when other people see that I feel that I am not powerless, that I have some power, they tend to respond in a way that actually gives me a tad bit more power. And I feel better about it. And it can be a virtuous circle, at least my experience. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree. In fact, in the book, Unconditional Power goes through 3 moods. And that's really the whole idea. There's 3 overarching moods. And one of them, you just hit on the nail on the head, powerless mood. And that's in the mood where we think, what difference can I make? I'm only one person here. That is true. We are only one person. But powerless is like a state of resignation, where we're almost giving up control because I feel powerless. There's 2 other moods we could talk about, and then the desirable mood is ultimately unconditionally powerful.
Okay, so tell me, what are these other 2 moods?
Well, the second one is where the bulk of the workforce is. In fact, we did a national study on teams. We found that the bulk of people tend to rely in this one area, and that's conditionally powerful. And that's the state where we do recognize we have power over the situation, but we often will cite it's conditional on other things. For example, somebody might say, well, I can get that done as long as this other team works accordingly. I can get that done as long as we have more money, as long as we have more resources, as long as I have a better boss, as long as I have better talent around me. There's always a condition to that power, but the desirable mood and where things happen is when we're unconditionally powerful. And unconditionally powerful means we recognize there's conditions, but we spend 100% of our control and focus on what we're going to do about the situation. Hence, there's conditions, but we recognize that we are unconditionally powerful. That's that state of making things happen.
All right, so powerless, there's nothing I can do. It's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. Wait until the world changes, then I can figure it out. Conditionally powerful, which is where most people sit, which is I can make something happen so long as somebody else does something. You said rightly, the other team delivers. I have a different boss. You give me a different priority list. You take something off my plate, whatever the condition is. And then the final one is unconditional power, which is I believe I can take an action. Fair?
And here's the reality. The only person we ever can control is ourselves. But we fail to sometimes recognize how powerful we are, and we give up our power by focusing on other things. And, somebody said to me years ago, happiness is an inside job. And even our state of our attitude is really about not outside, but it's internally. And see, if we think we don't have much power, then we'll easily cite excuses and we give up our power. So again, this is not over someone else. It's about making things happen. And when you really look at history, history is filled with people who made things happen. Gandhi, Martin Luther King, history goes on, but we see everyday people making big moves in their life. And even you can look at the state of someone's marriage. I mean, how often does somebody say, well, I can do I would have a better marriage as long as the other person cooperates, or they're making me miserable. And, I always laugh. I got to tell you this, Wanda, when somebody goes, they're making me miserable. What are they, creeping inside our body and moving our lips? Nobody makes us feel a certain way. They do what they do, and we feel a certain way. There are other people that could be in the exact same circumstance and say, look, I'm not going to allow that person to infect my mood, and I'm going to focus what I'm going to do about it. And we can talk about specifically what people can do, so it's not so out there, but it is about making things happen.
Okay, yeah, I want to get to the strategies, but I want to make sure we all understand what you mean by these three moods or three states of being. So powerless, conditionally powerful, and unconditionally powerful. All right, I'm going to give you a case scenario, Steve, and then I want you to tell me what a powerless response would be, what a conditionally powerful response would be, and what an unconditionally powerful response would be. So let's imagine that I have a project. I'm part of a project team. And in the context of this project team, there are a variety of people that I am depending on to get something done in order to complete the project. Maybe even I'm leading the project. And those people are difficult for me to deal with. Let's say one person in particular. I don't enjoy them. I don't feel that they're telling me the truth. I will tell my friends and family that they're lying and I can't trust them. They don't deliver the quality of work that I'm looking for. And if I don't get that quality of work, my boss is going to be breathing down my neck saying, Wanda, what are you doing and why are you doing it? Get on top of that. You got to make this happen. Okay? But I'm now dependent on somebody I don't control. They don't report to me. Not that I ever controlled them anyway, but they don't report to me. I can't all right. So what's the powerless response?
Well, the powerless mood and response is, what difference can I make? My boss is saying this, the person's lying, they're not cooperating, they're not telling the truth. I mean, I'm only one person here. I can't make somebody tell me the truth.
Fair enough.
That's a powerless way of viewing it.
All right. A conditional power response.
Conditional powerful would be, well, if I can get them to tell me the truth, and if they do improve, and if they step up, I can get the job done. But if they don't, I can only do so much. So I'll send them an email. I'll even have a meeting. But look, if they don't cooperate, what can I do?
Right. All right. And I can imagine also I can do this if my boss will speak to their boss.
Absolutely.
So I put it on the bosses to take action. Okay. All right. Now what's the unconditional powerful response?
Unconditionally powerful is a state with the three characteristics. And I want to kind of pause and just get everybody realizing it, because then the solutions will become obvious. The first is taking full responsibility for our attitude and actions. So what that means in this situation is they are being the way they are. What am I going to do about it? And so sometimes somebody will say, well, I tried this and I tried that. And my response is, okay, what else can you try? What other ways can you do it? For example, I made a call. Well, if they don't call me back, I'm going to continue making a call. I'm going to keep calling them until they respond back. I will call other people to get them to call me back. I'll set up a meeting in which I'll bring other influencers in the situation and make that happen. This second characteristic, which is really critical, is believing that anything is possible. And here's the way to think about this. If we look at this situation, logic would dictate, with over 8 billion or about 8 billion people who live on this planet, somebody has been in this exact situation. Somebody who's not truthful, somebody who's maybe a difficult boss, whatever, the talent is off. Somebody has probably walked exactly in my shoes and figured out the answer. So what I need to do is, if I believe that there's an answer out there, I'm going to go find the answer. And I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, we had to rely on the library and Dewey Decimal System and all this stuff. But now people at their computer can Google it and now ChatGPT it. There are books, there's videos. If I know somebody out there has walked exactly in our shoes and figured out the solution, now I won't use it as an excuse. I'm not going to be conditionally powerful. I'm going to say, somebody out there has made this happen. I'm going to go find this out. And then they learn that there's strategies about how to get people to tell the truth. Now, why do I know this? Is because one of our specialty is about how to get the unsaid said. In fact, we have found out that the biggest problem isn't what people say, but how do you get them to unearth the real truth? And we can go through strategies around that. And the third characteristic is taking action, because unconditionally powerful people recognize they take responsibility. They believe that there's always got to be solutions out there, and they take action. And this sounds so simple, but have you ever met somebody who talks a big game? I know it's my responsibility, and I know there are people out there that have solved it, and then they keep talking about it, but they never take action. You got to do something, right? So it's about taking action, and often massive action. Those three things are really critical. So when we overlap that on the situation, the third part might say, okay, so I'm going to have this, I'm going to have a meeting with this person, and I'm going to get my unsaid said in a vulnerable way to trigger them to get their unsaid said. For example, we have had several meetings, things aren't working. I don't know if there's something I can do or you can do, but whatever it is, I want to try to get the truth to this. So what can I do better to work better with you, right? Most people walk in that situation and say, I got to get them to come to my side. Why not begin with saying, look, what can I do better to better work with you? Well, you need to leave me alone. Well, that's a problem, because we've got to work together. And maybe what I need to do is a strategy called Be Them, where you go to their side of the equation and you focus on what's going on with them. And maybe we ask a series of questions. But the point being is that's how an unconditionally powerful person would look at this.
Okay. So I'm recognizing that there's always something I can do, that some other people have information that might be useful. So I'm not afraid to ask. I go seeking. And then 3, I do something. All right. So 2 things about this, Steve. One is it reminds me of what we know about resilience, that this is a brilliant formula for resilience. It's believing that I have more power than I might realize, that I can take an action that will move things to a different state of affairs, and that eventually we will get to a better place. Different place, but a better place. I just completely simplified a lot of work on resilience, but I think those are the essence of resilience. And if you look at historical figures, you mentioned this, Brad Borkin has written 3 books on that and been a podcast guest 3 times about major things that happened in the world, like the building of the Panama Canal, completing of the Panama Canal, I should say, under Teddy Roosevelt, that if you look at what Roosevelt did, it's exactly what you're describing, that unconditional power. Now, he had power because he was president at the time, but he didn't have power because Congress was not approving it. They wouldn't give him budget. There were unknown solutions that he had to invent. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff, and you see it playing out in historical characters as well.
Yeah, what's interesting also, can I comment on this?
Yes, please.
Sometimes somebody will look at history, but they also look at other people who are successful, and they rationalize why they were successful and we are not successful. That person is not. And I've come to believe the reason why people will rationalize that is because it's an excuse. I'm off the hook. Well, he was president, or that person has more money, or they came from a better family, or they were better educated, or their boss, the boss really plays favorites with that person. Whatever it is, my rationale is I'm developing excuses that could be legitimate, but quite often is not. But either way, it's an excuse, so I'm off the hook. But my comeback to that when people go down that path is it doesn't help your situation. So even though in the moment you can rationalize and maybe you feel better because you're trying to create that difference, in the end, you're still faced with that problem. It's miserable. So what you need to do, and what we all need to do, is what is the way to move anything in life, is to focus on what we can do about it. I'll give you an example. I'm a cancer survivor. And, did I cause the cancer? Of course not. It is what it is. I could not do anything that I had cancer, but I could deal with how I was going to respond to the cancer. And so what I did is that was actually at the same time as the Great Recession in 2009. And so, which was, they wipe out consulting and all that kind of stuff that happened back then. But faced with great headwind, I said, okay, I'm not the first person that's ever encountered cancer, not the first person that's ever encountered recession. So what am I going to do about this? And I took that as an opportunity to retool my business. And from those years on, we've had our best years ever in business. It's not that I'm that smart at all. It's more that I just recognize I can't control things that are obviously beyond me. So why focus any energy? But I'm 100% responsible for how I'm going to respond to this. And that's what this is all about.
And for the help I'm going to seek, and for how unrelenting I'm going to be about seeking that help, and for willingness to take an action, and so on. Mike Rubin, who's a well-known entrepreneur, says, sometimes you have to be willing to go in the side door. I think it's the same idea. I can't get this way. I'm going to try a different angle until I get where it is that I think is going to be useful for us. All right, Stephen, let's shift and talk about how. So you've got 9 strategies in your book that help you get to a state of unconditional power. I want to talk about 3 of them, and I want to take them sort of one by one and have you unpack what it is, give me an example of what it looks like, tell me how I can go about doing it. And the first one I want to pick on is make the unaware aware. Why and what does that look like?
So that means bring awareness to this distinction of powerless, conditionally powerful, and unconditionally powerful. So what that might be is translating to our listeners and people that may be even viewing the video is to actually go out and share that distinction. And that awareness can often move people to unconditionally powerful. Let me give you an example. I had a client of mine there was an operational upset, and people came to them and said, look, we got a problem. And all he said is, looking at this continuum, how are we approaching this? Are we being powerless? Are we being conditionally powerful or unconditionally powerful? And his team looked at it and said, you know what, we're being conditionally powerful. We're having a lot of conditions and excuses. And all he said was, how would we look at the same problem, that is clearly a problem, in an unconditionally powerful way? People said, well, we could do this and we could do that. And he went on to share with me that people started to give ideas and suggestions. He said within about 5 to 10 minutes, they had it solved with an action plan moving forward. And all he did was bring awareness. So I can't illustrate enough to bring awareness to this distinction, because the difference maker that my clients have told me over these years is to recognize that so many people are conditionally powerful. There's a lot of other distinctions like victim and all kinds of other stuff that are hard to self-admit, but we can all admit where we're on this continuum and do something about it. So bring awareness. So I want to encourage people, whether they mention my name, I don't care. I want to go out and change things. Just bring awareness to these 3 different moods and ask people, where are we and what could we do differently?
I'm reminded of a conversation I had today with a coaching client who is into the weeds and details. And those of you who are my coaching clients know that there's a lot of you who fit in that category, and are into the weeds and details because it's about controlling the quality. And because somebody in your team, you gave a lot of freedom to, they didn't quite deliver what you wanted. Your boss calls you up and says, you can't let that happen again, Wanda. That's not going to be good. It doesn't look good on you. It doesn't look good on us, yada, 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 yada. Okay. So now I'm all in their business, perhaps in a justified way. But that is that's a conditionally powerful stance, which says, I can't pull out of the weeds unless this person ups their quality game. Okay? But to look at that from a unconditional powerful point of view, even in this make aware, you could actually have that conversation with the individual who isn't delivering quality and say, what would it take for me to be to give you or whatever. I don't know what the wording is there.
Yeah.
Stephen, you can fill it in for me.
Well, what would it take so you feel unconditionally powerful? But the key thing is to first have them self-select where they feel.
Right.
Because chances are they're going to be conditionally powerful. That's actually how it sounds. Well, and they might say, well, Wanda, well, what do you want me to do? I mean, it is a reflection of these other people. I'm only so much in control. And then teach them unconditionally powerful. Unconditionally powerful recognizes those are legitimate conditions. I'm not saying they don't exist. But given that you're the only person you can control, what are you going to do about the situation? I'm reminded of the situation I did with this with the U.S. Navy, and so I was working with this team, and they were complaining about the top leadership of this one area. And I said to the team, I said, given that you're the only person that you can control, what are you going to do about this? And that deals with the second strategy that we're going to talk about, intentional disruption. But essentially what I did is I disrupted the negativity and redirected it and said a factual statement. Given that you're the only person you can control, what are you going to do about it? Well, I asked that about 2, maybe 3 times, but by asking that repeatedly, the team started to redirect and they said, you know what, you're right. I mean, we could communicate better. We could share better ideas. We could sit there and not commiserate with each other and complain. We could take some action. So they started shifting it. So it's a combination of awareness and intentional disruption. But the point is that there's a lot of value in just getting people to self-aware.
Right. I can imagine in my client's case, sitting there and saying, yes, I have to make sure that this is higher quality, but what can I do about it? There's one response, which is I largely do it myself. There's another response that says, okay, where's the feedback? Or well, how can I get that person to feel that they have more power on this continuum? How do I have that conversation? And you can imagine the person who's reporting to my client might say, oh yeah, I could run this report by 3 other people on the team. I could talk about the structure of the report I'm going to write before I write it. There's a whole bunch of actions that could be taken that would elevate it without me or my client getting into the details.
Can I add one thing in here? Because I think, and sometimes the value of asking the question why, getting to the root cause, very often it's not what we think. So for example, ask them, look, I noticed this is happening. What's going on? Why? And maybe there's something we've done that makes them feel disempowered. Well, I have tried to take action, and then you rewrite everything I do. Or I did, and then and somebody came down hard on me and you didn't have my back. Or whatever the case may be. That may be true, that may not be true. But so often when somebody calls me for advice, I start asking a series of questions and I'll say, do you know why they're doing that? And Wanda, I can't tell you how many times somebody has said, I don't know why. Or they'll say, I think it's this, this, and this. I'll say, so I'm not beating you up here, but you don't know why. Why doesn't the first step go ask them? What's going on? In maybe a compassionate or at least understanding way.
Right. So it's understanding where I'm behaving on this powerless to unconditionally powerful continuum, put myself there, and say, what would it look like if I operated in an unconditionally powerful way? And it's my counterpart, the same thing, and trying to get them to articulate where they are and what it would look like for them to operate in an unconditionally powerful way. And by the way, what it is I might do differently that would help them be unconditionally powerful.
Excellent.
Okay, great. All right, your next one you've already previewed, which is this notion of intentional disruption. Why and what does that really look like?
So intentional disruption is when the direction of the conversation, meeting, or team is going in the wrong direction. In other words, they're becoming more conditional or powerless. And in fact, I see this a lot now because there's so much uncertainty in various businesses, some that are dealing with the government, some that are not. But there's a lot of headwinds in a lot of different industries where people are slipping into being conditional, powerful, or even powerless. And so what to do is to intentionally disrupt the pattern. There's 2 types of intentional disruption. One is physical, where we might do something different. And it might be as simple as we've always met in the same meeting area, so we're going to change it to a new location. So we're disrupting that mindset, and maybe that's a different way. We all intuitively do that when something's going badly. We just sometimes get up from our desk and go take a walk. We know to not wallow in it. That's physical, but the real big one is mental intentional disruption through the art of questions. There are 3 great questions that people can ask that can redirect any meeting, and we don't even have to be in control of it. One is, what would you suggest? So a great example of this is we've all had people in our lives who sit there and complain, and they go, I can't believe blah, 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 blah. And you just say, well, what would you suggest? So we're not saying they don't have the right to complain. They're just redirecting. So, wow, that's really upsetting. What would you suggest? And so that's a way to redirect it. A second good question is, what would it take for you to agree? What would it take for you to agree? A good example of this is you're in a meeting and people are going at it and you're like, oh my gosh, nothing's getting handled. You could say, what would you suggest? Or you could raise your hand and say, look, there's a lot of disagreement here. How do we get some agreement? How do we move forward? Or we suggest something to our boss and our boss says, we're not going to move forward. What would it take for you to change your mind? What would it take for you to reconsider? Or let's say we don't get that promotion. What would it take so I'd be next in line for the promotion? But essentially, what would it take to get agreement to move forward? The third great question, which is one of my favorites and people's big favorite, is, can you live with it? Can you live with it? I don't know about you, but just being vulnerable here, I have spent a lot of time in my life having stupid conversations about things I have no effect over, or it doesn't really matter, and I get so attached to a particular solution or outcome. And if somebody had just said, or if we just say, can you live with it? It kind of shakes us up and realizes, yeah, I can. I don't like it, but it's not a deal breaker. And I've used these 3 questions in facilitating many, many tough situations to get to a solution. But we can use it on other people, but we can also use these questions on ourselves. Those are all examples of intentional disruption.
Those strike me as brilliant questions to use as a member of a team or even as a leader of a team when there is a lot of disagreement going on around the room. And just those 3 questions. What do you suggest? Okay, what would it take for you to agree? And can you live with it? Seems a way of cutting through some of the clutter that often clogs up all of our meeting time.
It does. In fact, I have a client recently who took, can you live with it? And he said, we have cleaned up so many issues because we were spending times, and now I just say, can you live with it? Oh, incidentally, if somebody goes, I can't live with it, you go back to question 1. Well, if you can't live with it, what would you suggest? What would it take for you to agree? And can you live with it? To this point, I've never participated in a conversation, facilitated or watched something happen where not using those 3 questions has not produced a breakthrough. 100% it has always produced a breakthrough, because if they can't live with it, well, then what's your suggestion? So if you keep doing that, and even in our home life, you'll move anything forward.
Well, and the point is not always to solve it today, once and forever. It's to move it forward. Because that's where the unconditional power really comes from. We moved it forward. We're in a bit different state, hopefully a little bit better state. We have more information. We move it forward again. It's that steady progress or steady movement that I think is the secret to most of these intractable issues in the first place.
I agree. And I just want to say that having worked with so many leadership teams, and that's the big focus of what we do in all kinds of industries, but even like the nuclear industry, I mean, all kinds of industries and hospitality, some people are faced with complex, tough problems. And so we're not going to solve it 100%. But the key is, what do we do moving it forward? Because otherwise we have these repetitive meetings that just do a lot of talking and no action and nothing moving forward.
Right,
so
right.
A big point is to move it forward.
Move it forward. Okay. Anywhere, just move it forward. I love the 3 questions. What do you suggest? What would it take for you to agree? And can you live with it? Excellent. All right, so let's move to your third of the 9 strategies. You're going to have to buy the book if you want to see all 9 of them. But the third one is reframing. And what's interesting is we all hear the word reframing. I'm not sure we're really good at it. You describe, so tell us what it is. Give me an example. And then I know you've got multiple ways to do this.
So reframing is how we look at a situation. And what I've found by working with people who really make things happen, and even when we look at ourselves, when we have made things happen, it's often that we look at differently. And that's the art of reframing. It's like, I'll give you a kind of a basic way, and then we'll get to the different ways. A friend of mine said to me one time, even our worst days are somebody's best days ever. And it hit me because, we all complain and get upset at times in life, but wow, so much of what we deal with are blessed, and somebody else would gladly love to have our problems because that's their best days because they have so many worse things. So that's an example of reframing overall. But the three overall arching types of reframes, and I say because there's many, and there's experts talking about reframing, but I'm big on simplifying a lot of concepts. So my three favorite ways to reframe, one is to simplify the problem. So you reframe it in a smaller manner. And that would be where you're taking a complex problem and you say, let's say a big change management or a big reorg, and you're like, oh my gosh, we could go this way, could go that way. You say to the team, okay, so what's one action we could take now between now and next week? Or another example is, let's say somebody on our team is causing all kinds of problems, and we got to coach them. And so we might say, look, you're messing up here, you're messing up there, and it's going to be overwhelming. But if we can simplify and say, look, there's a lot of problems, but if you could just focus on responding to people within 24 hours and just changing your tone in the way you're approaching it, that's what I want you to focus on for the next 2 weeks. In other words, simplify it. And when you really look at people who are great leaders, they take complex problems and they simplify it so people feel like, you know what, I can do this. And versus, have you ever met somebody who could take a problem that's complex and make it really complex? And you're like,
Yeah.
I was lost before, but now I'm really lost now.
Yeah, absolutely. I do notice that the CEOs that I admire the most and that seem to get the best results as well are very good at this simplification. And they sort of zero in on the one or two actions that are going to move us forward best. And yes, there are 100 others we got to do, but these one or two are the things they want everybody to get focused on. So they have this ability to get that focus clear, crystal clear. And then they kind of, tell everybody else, yeah, but we'll get to that. Yeah, but we'll get to that. And they do. It's just there's that clarity of what's the one thing that's going to make the biggest immediate impact is really spot on. Okay, so simplify is one way to reframe.
Yeah, to make it smaller. The other second type of reframe is we do the exact opposite, and there's value in doing that, is to put it in a larger frame. And this is so important because sometimes we've had major problems that just happen. And great leaders can take a problem, but put it in a larger context. So we feel like, although this is a problem, we have a much bigger mission to solve. And we're inspired by that mission. And those are people who are great visionaries. They put a problem in a lot bigger circumstance. And, if you think about it, and if I look at my life, some people who are always in great moods, there's some people who are fake about it. But the people who are authentically in a good mood really do put things in a proper context. It's like they'll say, this is a problem. They don't spin it. They say, look, this is a problem. But let's put this in a larger context. We've worked through a lot tougher situations. So an example of this is I will work with the leadership team and I'll ask them this question. What are 3 pivot points that have happened in your life, challenges, and how have you overcome them and how has it impacted your life? And people share it and great stuff happens. But I'll use that as example later on. I'll say, look, so now you're faced with this growth issue or whatever we need to do with a customer or growing revenue. You've gone through a lot tougher situations that you shared earlier today. So this is nothing. So you're putting it in a larger context. And that's really important. So people get out of the upset of an immediate situation and put it in a larger situation. That's where we look at how blessed we are, how many good things have happened, or the good parts of our team. So a larger context to empower people to move forward.
Right. Well, and sometimes that larger context helps you realize that the problem isn't that big. So let's say we have a problem with a client who's constantly complaining about something we do in an operational procedure. The larger context is to say, yes, this client matters, but how big is this client? Is it our top client? Then let's everybody get on it. Is it someone of the smaller clients? Then maybe we don't need to worry about it quite so much. So that even just a simplified context like that can help you say, how big is this problem? How much of my energy does it deserve?
And I love what you're saying because that's almost a combination of reducing it and enlarging it, which people will share this. So this is not like I got to use this tool and not that tool. Sometimes it's an and these are just all tools so that we move ourselves and the team forward and the organization forward to an unconditionally powerful state. So sometimes we do this as a combination.
Combination. Okay, so I've got simplify, which is to make it smaller. I've got to put it in a larger frame or context so we get perspective on how this fits or what else we've done. What's your third way of reframing?
So the third way is we change the frame entirely. We create a whole new, brand new frame that empowers people to move forward. A good example of this was in July 2020. So this is a few years back. I had an IT issue around the team that was working on an IT issue, and it was in July, and I asked them, when are you going to finish this project? And it was taking a long time. So they said, well, I mean, this or that, but it's probably going to take us till November. And I thought inside, my inside voice was like, November, this is not that complicated. And I was about to develop not the best tone, Wanda. It was not going to come out right. And then I thought to myself, well, what do I ideally want? And I thought, I really want this done in a month. So what I asked them is, given that I ideally would like this done in a month, what would need to happen? I didn't say it had to be done. I said, given that I ideally would like it done in a month, what would need to happen? Well, I'll credit the company. They came back with a list of things that if I could agree to it, could get done very quickly. And you know what? I could agree to all of it. And I did. And it was done within 6 weeks. Here's the point that I'm always reminded by this situation. Instead of being stuck in their frame of November, I just thought, what do I ideally want, and try to facilitate that to happen. So what about when we're having a difficult time with someone and we're trying to overcome all these obstacles? What if we said, given that I ideally want us to have the best relationship, best team situation ever, what would need to happen? Given that I want to do the best job for you, you could say to your boss or your leader or the person you're reporting, what would need to happen? So what you're doing is the best way to do this is use the prepositional phrase, given that I would ideally want, and then you put X. So ideally, given that I ideally want this, what would need to happen? That's an example. And then there are other just overall examples. Another really great total reframe is all problems create opportunities. All problems create opportunities. And that I feel is a truism in life. I'm not saying all problems are good, back to the cancer situation, recession, whatnot, but I'm saying all problems do create opportunities. And for me, cancer was an opportunity to hit reboot in my life. I delayed a lot of things. I was like, this person will live forever. I'll live for, when I'm being silly, but I was like, I have to enjoy my life and I have to be much more present to people around. I respect health a lot more. But the point being is, all problems create opportunities. So whatever somebody's faced with right now, as they're listening, and you're thinking, I have a problem. I'm not saying you don't have a problem. So focus, instead of the problem, what are the opportunities it allows you to do, and you could do, and do that.
Okay. We're back to that notion of unconditionally powerful, because if I see every problem, I'm going to focus on what I can't do. If I see the opportunity, I'm going to focus on what I can do. And we're right back to unconditionally powerful. All right, so 3 strategies. Make the unaware aware, which means where am I on the continuum from powerless to unconditionally powerful? Where's my counterpart? And what would it take for us to move to more unconditionally powerful? What would have to happen? Second one is an intentional disruption, which is, yes, physically, I can go to a different location. We can meet in a different place. We can disrupt things in terms of the physical context, but we can also disrupt it in terms of our thinking. So 3 questions. What do you suggest? What would it take for you to agree? And can you live with it? Sounds like really powerful questions to me. And the third tactic for moving to unconditionally powerful is to reframe. Reframe either by simplifying, making it a smaller problem, or by making it larger in a larger context, so we see all of the complexity, or see the bigger picture, I think I want to say. And 3 is by changing how we're thinking about it, either looking for an opportunity, or if my ideal is X, what needs to happen for that to happen.
The book covers a lot of other things, but we can send them also an article that goes through at least some of the other ones, although brief, but something they can share with their team. So all they have to do is contact us at justbehonest.com, justbehonest.com. And also something else, Wanda, and then we can go wherever you want with it. But I want people to do something with what they've heard today. So if they do and take an action, for them to email us, I'll send them the very first book I wrote called Just Be Honest, that goes through a very powerful distinction on how to have a difficult conversation with anyone. I'll send them the electronic version for free. All they have to do is share that they listen to the show, and I want to and for them to share what they did with the information, and hopefully that they made a big difference or a difference, and we'll send them that book for free.
Okay, so there's an article that will go through the other strategies briefly, justbehonest.com. Send you an email with what did you listen to and what did you do, one thing, and you'll get your first book about Just Be Honest as a free electronic copy. All right, so where do they send that email, Steve?
Yeah, so if they go to justbehonest.com and there's a contact area, or if they want to go directly, it's info@stephengaffney.com. So my name, Stephen Gaffney. So info@stephengaffney.com, or they can just go to the website justbehonest.com. It all goes to the same place, but just be honest, and they can see the contact, and then they can contact us. Whatever's easiest.
Whatever is easiest. And I love that because you teased this at the very beginning, that there is a solution on how do I get people to tell me the truth. Just be honest. So there we go. Justbehonest.com, info@stephengaffney.com. Steve, I love the conversation. I love the tactics and strategies. I am convinced they will move all of us to a more resilient, unconditionally powerful, more optimistic state of mind, all of which are good for our leadership without any doubt. So thank you for those insights.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on the show.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. My guest today, Stephen Gaffney. The book is called Unconditional Power, A System to Thrive in Any Situation, no matter how frustrating, complex, or unpredictable. And join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone. Certainly send us a comment if you like on outofthecomfortzone.com, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.